Hi, Pratham here from Cow Corner Cricket Cast. I'm joined by my mate Rohan, and today we're going to be discussing the fifth Test match of this Ashes series, the final one, held at a completely stunning new venue, Hobart, between England and Australia. And the first thoughts that come to my mind about this Test really are that it's a dead rubber. It really is.
It was the most dead rubber test of this entire series.
Yeah, I mean,
Because at least in the previous test, which was also a dead rubber, right? You could see that England were playing for something.
yes. And to be fair to them, they would have probably gone here at Hobart, having done put in, I should say, their best performance of the series in the SCG, managing to draw. Yes, they were aided by rain, and yes, they were 9 wickets down, but they managed to draw the match. And they actually had
It's still going to be recorded as drawn match.
Yeah, and they did have.
No one will care about the fact that it was on the 9th wicket because of a rain delay at the end of the day when two leggies, two spinners, one of which was a part timer, was bowling.
Yeah. But no, I mean, having been hammered in the manner that they were in those first 3 tests, and especially in the third test, in what was, quite frankly, one of the most humiliating moments of English cricket, 68 all out at the MCG, they had gotten a bit of I would say, a spring in their step after that draw, and they would have looked at this test to sort of end on a high note, England.
Yeah.
Instead, what happened was they got hammered for a 4th time in the series. And, before we get started talking about how they got hammered in that particular way, guys, just take a quick look at a recap of the scorecards and so forth. So, in the case that you weren't able to catch the entire match, or you had some queries about how it went, you can take a look at those. And then when we come back, we'll give our thoughts about how the match went. So before we get to the match proceedings itself, I just want to make a quick note regarding the pitch. Now, this entire Ashes cycle, we have seen pitches that have been very atypical of Australia. The English touring party expected wickets similar to those probably in 2017, 2018. That is to say, wickets that were flat, somewhat hard, but genuinely good to bat on, wickets that would last the course of 5 days. This match got over in 3 days, and that, in part, was really down to the pitch. It had a crazy bright green look to it. It looked like one of those Christmas cones, that you would have, like those cookies that would be assembled with Christmas cones.
Yeah.
What like a neon green color that's not natural for an actual Christmas tree, and that's because there was a lot of live green grass on it, right? And it was pretty much evenly fairly patched. Now, I will say,
I do want to say this, because we were talking about this in the previous video, that Belrive, which is the ground at Hobart, produces 2 wickets. One is a slow, sort of low, easy to bat on wicket. The other is an English seamer.
and a green top at that too. But we got the second of those 2, and the reason why we got the second of those 2 is because normally when Hobart doesn't have green grass on it, it reverts to a flat, slow, low wicket that we were talking about. So clearly the curator had in mind, especially to protect and preserve the pink ball. Obviously when the pitch is a bit dry, it tends to get a little bit scuffed up. It becomes a little more difficult for them to retain the lacquer and the shine of the pink ball. So there's a little bit of grass that's usually put on it, especially in Australia and what you would call Sena countries, effectively, and we saw that. And I think the pitch itself was interesting because this was, I mean, Ron, you made reference to when we talked about it and talking about it as like an English seamer, and this was legit the most English seamer wicket.
It looked like a county cricket wicket in April.
Yeah, and guys, what we also mean by that, right, is that the grass was there and it looked really verdant, right? They're very lush, but there was also a softness to the wicket. It underneath it's a pretty flat wicket, right? There's nothing really uneven going on and so forth. And you saw that with even someone like Broad, who's a relatively tall seamer. He's not quite at this stage, but he's relatively tall, bowling around 135 kilometers. You saw the ball dying in the second session to the keeper. That was taking them not that far back, Billy. So that really does give you an indication and sense of what this pitch was like. It was a slowish. I mean, it wasn't slow, but it was a slowish, relatively lowish green pitch that, as the match went on, would become better to bat. Vagaries of the pink ball aside, and seemed to be spurred on by the fact that they were getting a wicket that was very English-like initially, because they fired their own opening shots of sorts, with a rather miraculous opening first 10 or 12 overs.
Yeah.
Ron, you'd say?
Yeah, I think honestly that was their best opening spell of the tour, and I don't think that's a coincidence. Jimmy Anderson and only one of Jimmy Anderson and Stuart Broad were on the field during it, but it was a really well put together opening spell. They pitched the ball in the right length, and they in the right line as well, and they forced the Australians to really have to work hard to survive. And it paid off. They got 12 for 3, which is exactly what you want to get if you're bowling first. In fact,
and critically, Robinson and Broad both, to the point of the length, pitched the ball up consistently, right? In those first 10 to 15 overs, it's been shown that the pink ball provides a little bit more movement usually than the red ball, and initially, the most amount of movement, contrary to what people think, with the pink ball, is provided conventionally, which is to say within the first 10 or 15 overs. Right. And so it was critical that England adjusted their lengths for once and bowled fuller for once and actually made the batsmen come forward and play for once, and they did that. Broad and Robinson were superb in that. Robinson especially was able to get the ball to seam both ways at almost a will. It was a very good performance from them. But then, as much as we have been clamoring on the show for the English seamers to pitch it up with a new ball, and as much as we've been clamoring for them to, actually start bowling in a way which is going to threaten the batsmen and make them, make that front foot adjustment that can get the nick to your slips and so forth, I thought they erred on the one sort of pitch where they could have gotten after that opening session, once Robinson left the field due to his niggles and was unable to bowl, because then you had the bowlers in Wood and Wokes that came in, support seamers, and you had Broad as well. And I think they lost the plot a little bit because Australia recovered, right? But
brilliant recovery knock. I think has to be full credit needs to go to Marnus Labuschagne, Travis Head, and Cameron Green.
Yes, absolutely. Their counter-attacking approach, I think, should be extolled for a different reason as well. But I think what England really lost at that particular moment, and again, it's indicative of England's muddled and almost, retroactive thought process and approach, right? Because they thought, this entire series we've been getting a lot of flack because we're not pitching the ball up, and on conditions that have been helpful for us, where we've been getting some seam movement and the ball has been bouncing a bit. It should be, you need to pitch it a little bit fuller to get the batsman driving and playing after that initial spell even, right? The problem with England in this England seamers that I was talking about, right, Wood, Wokes, and even Broad after that initial spell to an extent, was on a green wicket like this, where there's not that much movement, and shouldn't say movement, but there's not that much pace and bounce on it, right? And the ball is seaming and jagging around like crazy. What they really needed to do at that stage was bowl after that initial new ball that lost its lacquer a little bit. They need to actually adjust their lengths a little bit and bowl a good length, not a short of a length, mind you, which would hurt a little bit as well on that side as well. But they needed to bowl a good length, and they needed to bowl it around third off stump to a fourth stump line. Instead, what happened was Wood and Vokes both ended up bowling a lot of hit me balls that were full pitch, over pitched half volleys, but they were super wide. And so what it did was because of the extent of how wide they were, especially, right? If the batsman went after them, right, and got that front foot forward stride, which they could, because again the pitch didn't have that much pace and bounce to it. It wasn't that sort of a thing. They could actually, because of how wide the length was, even if they nicked it, right, it would have gone to, like a fourth slip or something to that effect. And so it would actually been. They were able to recognize that with an aggressive field, batsmen who were brave enough would realize, okay, I can go after the bowling here and shift the momentum so long as that happens. They also bowl a lot of cut me balls, which are short and wide. And really, England lost the advantage after that, despite getting Labuschagne after his counter-attack for, 83 for 4 or something like that, right? But Head and Green came in and played superbly after that and recognized that and exploited that really well. As to why England were unable to continue with their momentum, and Australia were able to seize it. The two men who ended up scoring with that match-winning partnership right? Cameron Green and Travis Head. Now, Travis Head is a batsman who is known, even in Australian circles. There's been a lot of conversation, even for the start of the series, even during the series, that he has a noticeable problem against the bumper, the bouncer effect, right? Ron, would you like to guess how many deliveries Wood bowled to him, and out of those, how many deliveries were bumpers?
I have no idea, brother. Why don't you tell me?
There were 24 deliveries that he bowled them, so say 4 overs effectively, out of which he bowled 4 deliveries that were actual bouncers. Now, you are allowed to bowl more than one bouncer an over. You're also allowed to bowl a lot of short pitch deliveries that are below, what you would call your
bouncer height.
Below
the neck.
Below the neck, effectively. The fact that they didn't do that, and critically, I want to also make this point. They bowled that bouncer, right? The first bouncer that Wood bowled to Head in the match was one where Head got hit, and he sort of just awkwardly fended it off to where a short leg should have been. He wasn't. I'll come to that later, but he wasn't. And again, what that indicates is the fact that Mark Wood, right, who England see as a guy who hustles and bustles with pace and bounce and is an enforcer. The fact that the enforcer in your attack, right, didn't do the enforcing against the one guy who's been scoring really, crunch, quick runs against you, but also has been the one guy who has a problem against that style of bowling in particular, right, is at the end of a tour, right? This is not at the start of a tour. I can understand if it was in the Gabba, maybe you could, excuse it to some extent. But at the end of the tour, where his problems are known and he has already hurt you, damaged you, is inexcusable, really, from a tactical point of view. Those two things sort of, in a sense, let off Head and Green. But I do want to make a mention for both of their performances because I thought they were fantastic, right?
Absolutely.
And again, I think they were fantastic because they seized the momentum of the match and they played in a way that was very. It may seem like they were, just trying to bash quick runs and so forth for themselves, but no, it was actually those two innings were very unselfish for the team because what they recognized was the fields that Root set for once in the series, I would argue, were genuinely aggressive, right? 4 slips, 5 slips at one point I saw, things to that effect, right? They recognized that, hey, they already have the ace in the hole at around that 83 for 4, right? They recognize the English bowlers are sending blood. The captain for once is bowling aggressively and so forth. But there is a little bit of waywardness here. If we go after them, eventually Root will have to adjust. There'll be a lot of gaps available in the field.
Yeah.
We will be able to And critically, they got their front foot forward strides out really well. They were very decisive with that. And so they were able to get the pitch of the ball and belt it in conditions of one.
And that in turn obviously put Root, who is at heart a defensive captain, in the mindset of, I have to defend because my bowlers are going for runs, not, these guys are scared, that's why they're playing aggressively. Let's keep putting pressure on them. They'll eventually make a mistake.
And exactly that happened. There were, not, Root still kept a couple of close infielders in there, but you could see even like he had 4 slips at one point, that became 2 to Wokes at one stage, and so again, right, the point being, it was brilliant insight from Head and Green in particular to do that. I talked about Head in particular, how authoritative he got on the front foot and drove and so forth. But I think a shout out has to go to Cameron Green as well, just from a technical perspective, because Green throughout the series, right, has shown his mettle as a bowler. He's, averaged pretty low as a bowler, has been taking crucial wickets and so forth. But his batting had a very shaky start, the start of the season, right? It could have been very easy for somebody like Cameron Green to try to, to just rest on the laurels of that and not try to prove his mettle with the bat here. But this was a innings when the team needed him. It was a very crunch innings. And I loved his approach to the innings as well, because I don't know if you noticed this, but when Head was batting with him, right, till around the 40th over when Head got out, he only had hit 3 4s in his 50. And the reason why he only hit 3 4s in his 50 was because he was absolutely brilliantly strike rotating throughout the entire time. He kept on running singles. His communication with Head was decisive. Whenever there was a run, then single that needed to be made, it was immediately communicated, right?
Which is something we're going to get onto a little bit in a few minutes. But and I think especially if you're looking forward, if you're an Australia fan or someone who's interested in Australian cricket generally, I think this will really serve him well, especially running between the wickets, because the next series that Australia plays is going to be overseas in the subcontinent against Pakistan.
And you need to be able to rotate.
You need to rotate strike. That's
especially against
that's what has made teams that are successful in the subcontinent, specifically India, so deadly, because their bowling suffocates them by taking away singles and forcing the batsman to say, okay, you think you can hit us out of the attack? Hit us out of the attack.
Yeah. And when you are able to find those singles, then it puts pressure back on the bowlers, and it contributes to them being a little more wayward, which we actually saw today in part with the likes of Wood and Wokes. So he gets his 50, he rotates the strike, he gives the strike to Head, who's the belligerent one in the partnership, and lets him assume the momentum, which is, again, sensible batting, because you're batting in partnership. You're understanding whose approach is what, and you're playing it accordingly, and you're doing it in a way which is maximizing the damage, i.e. the amount of runs that the opposition team, England, are conceding. How did that happen? The Lion cameo was the best, The tail end of cameo, I'm just going to, talk about things in a vacuum here for a bit. The tail end of knocks in this entire series have been fantastic to watch. Richardson was having a swing in Adelaide, Stark's been having a swing.
Stark with this entire series.
It's awesome. And then this Lion one was great. He was playing shots like Gordon Greenwich, and I was like, with that swivel pull, and I was like, oh my god, dude, where is this guy, this hidden legend? He should be the opener for Australia now.
Nathan Lyon, top 4 batsman. Let's do it. Let's get it done.
He's the GOAT, right? So we should be like that, Yep.
Demote Steve Smith, because he hasn't scored a century in the Ashes, down to number 8, and then promote Nathan Lyon into his position, so Lyon can start having a whack.
All jokes apart, right, guys? Head and Green, after they had gotten Australia to, collectively, along with Labuschagne, made a 40-odd to 236 for 6. The Lion cameo enables them to get a score of 300, plus effectively.
Which is about 3 runs more than they really need, considering England cannot score 300 runs.
Yeah, and we saw that in the second innings, right? Because they didn't approach anywhere near 300, did they?
No, that was not good.
Yeah, and really, man, I feel really bad for Rory Burns because it seems like all of us commentators like to pick on him. But when you get run out in the fashion that he did first up,
I don't blame Rory Burns for this because it was not his decision. He's doing the right thing.
Yeah, it was a bad run from Zach. It was a bad call from
Zach Crawley. Yeah, and you could see Crawley knew it was a bad call, and he was like, "Yeah, you know what? I'll just go with it." And who cares? Rory's runs don't matter.
Yeah, so I do feel for Rory. You know, it's a terrible way to get out, right? Like without being
run out on a duck.
Yeah, it's just a way no one wants it. But I think it's crucial because it highlights a key difference between the sides when it comes to batting, right? Australia's bowlers have been credited a lot for applying a lot of pressure to the English batting lineup and being able to get them out for a lot of very cheaply, and often they've been done that by building pressure due to maidens and so forth. Now, the easiest way to actually stop or prevent maidens from occurring, known as what? To accumulate singles. Right. Yeah. England, throughout this entire series, have struggled to rotate the strike effectively and ease that dot ball pressure. But at first appearance, you might just be thinking, okay, they don't have the technique or the short strokes playing. They don't have the sort of soft hands you need to just drop the ball and get a single or so. But you look at somebody like Rory Burns, even in this innings and the next one, in the fourth innings, there were plenty of times he did show that he had the capability to play with soft hands. So why is that issue occurring, right? In my mind, one of the factors that is not being discussed nearly enough, and we saw it today, is because the English batsmen, right, partially because of the chopping and changing, partially because of all of these sort of things, but especially their opening partnership, they do not consistently enough have enough faith with each other and trust each other with calls and runs between the wickets. Obviously, players, I don't think most players, right, are going to actively be like, "Mwahaha," I'm going to deny this guy a chance to get a single. No. But one of the reasons why I think it does happen, right, is down to the fact that a lot of the batsmen, right, like someone like a Crawley, right, it sees somebody like a Burns in this first innings, right, where the effort to actually get back on strike, right, or get back to the crease, right, like the effort to dive, and to avoid that being run out effectively, right, is lacking, right? There's a lack of momentum in that sense, even in their approach towards getting a single or towards a desperation, as we would call it, right, to avoid getting out and to exploit those opportunities, right? And I know that might seem minor, it might seem like something that people wouldn't care about, but it adds up, right? When you're in a batting partnership, right? Again, a batting partnership, batsmen bat in partnerships. If they sense, hey, this guy is not somebody who is going to make that extra effort to dive, to make sure that he gets a single or so forth, right? Then that creates ambiguity in your mind, even when you think you have opportunities to get quick singles, because you're like, hey, I don't know if I do even pick this particular quick single. Should I go for it? Will he run for it? Will they not be able to run for it? And that's where you get mix-ups like this. And I think that's a huge factor that's underrated as to why England haven't been able to build partnerships and bat consistently enough in partnerships during the series. The best way to play a spinner when the ball is spinning is on the other end, right? And it's a saying that's applicable to pacers when there's a green top as well. The best place to play the pacer.
You don't want to be playing it. It's long and short of it. So get off strike quickly.
Yes, and England struggle to do that, right? And it really set in stone what happened thereafter with England's performance.
I mean, there were a few sporadic moments of resistance within this English collapse. There was a good partnership between Root and Milan, who've been okay.
Yeah,
that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, they've been probably the consistently the ones that, out of the players that have been picked for the series, they've probably been the two best batsmen from the English side.
And then another sort of like rearguard action with Sam Billings and Chris Wokes. Again, not to any real effect, but they tried. They gave it the
They did, but again, you look at some of the dismissals, right? Like you mentioned Billings. I thought he actually did look really good with the bat and the stumps out there. He had a very assertive approach, took the fight to the faces. But you look at his dismissal, England are 152 for 6, right? They have the ability to salvage something out of this match and get something approaching Australia's total, right? Somewhere around the 250 mark.
Yeah, if England gets like 200, 220.
Yeah,
which is doable.
Yeah, the lead is not impossible to deal with, especially if they can get to the lead under 50, right? But you see his sort of dismissal, right? He's hooking a ball against, Green, right? Straight to the man at bowling, right? Who's stationed there, which is bowling, right?
Yeah.
Very loose shot, right? Fundamentally, right?
Yeah.
And again, you just see multiple instances. Again, Ollie Pope is another example of this, right? He's a young gun. He's had a terrible time in the store, but you look at his dismissal off Boland as well, right? Just hanging the bat outside, right? Just a nothing shot, really, right? And you see, once again, England's batsmen, right, really losing the plot the moment even slight amounts of pressure applied to them. Because Green and Boland in the overs prior had sort of put them on relative tenterhooks with a couple of dot balls, right? And that's just not excusable for a batting lineup.
We're also forgetting about the guy who in this innings bowled the best.
Yeah.
Which was Pat Cummins, who was fantastic and, took 3 big wickets, knocking over 2, 3, and 2 and 3, and then getting the big man to root, and then finally knocking over the blade of justice, Mark Wood.
To close out the innings. I will say one thing that I've always appreciated about Cummins, apart from him being a brilliant bowler, I should say throughout this series, is his ability, as a tactical captain, now in that particular role, as a bowler, I like the fact that he's giving himself a short leg. And I like it because with his line of attack, right, he's a guy who bowls a really good length and he gets the ball to move around, right? The deck can come in sharp.
And he can move it both ways, too.
Yeah, an appreciable movement. We saw the delivery to root that he got, which was a real inducker, like Broad-esque, in one of those magic spells that Broad usually does. I like the fact that given that he knows he has that ability to do that outside the off stump, I like the fact that he is giving himself a short leg. Now, normally, you'd be like, why would you have a short leg if he's not bowling bounces or so forth, right? But with Cummins, what he recognizes very well is that with his length and his ability to, because he's a tall man and because of his release point and because of his action, he tends to extract that bounce, extra bounce every now and then. He recognizes that often if the English batsmen, especially with their sort of deficient defensive techniques, try to push a lunge forward at one of the balls, there's a very good chance that they will, essentially get an inside edge and it goes to the man at short leg. And it worked for him again today, right? We saw, the dismissal that he had against Crawley, right? He had the inside edge as he envisioned, and it ballooned ahead at, the short leg, right? Again, it's just very good bowling.
I also want to just give a little bit of a shout out to Mitch Stark, who bowled pretty well, but he went for a lot of runs, but he bowled pretty well, as he can do.
He's. I think England. I think Australia understands his role in this lineup. They recognize that he's going to concede a lot of runs. But he also takes wickets, right? And when you have a bowler,
and more importantly than just taking wickets, he's probably the best bowler in the world when it comes to bowling at the tail, which again is a real skill. I understand that a lot of cricket fans hate when bowlers only take wickets against the tail, but there's a reason why it's really important that you take wickets against the tail. Otherwise, the tail wags and adds 50 runs to the score, and all of a sudden you're like, well, instead of looking at 250, now we have to chase 300.
Yeah,
and instead of looking at 300, we have to chase 350 and 400, etc.
Yeah, right? And to that point, right, a really critical point, the tail wags, right? In a low-scoring match, it can often be the difference between a win and a loss. India found this out the hard way when they toured, not this last tour to England, but the tour before it in 2018.
Sam Curran came in and shepherded the tail to some really in context, big scores.
Yes. And so that is incredibly critical, right? For you to be able to wipe out a tail quickly in a slow scoring match. But the other factor also about it is tails have gotten better to bat with over the years, right? Especially
and
now.
You can credit a lot of that to G20 cricket, in my opinion, because they have to bat now.
Yeah. No, but the point being, right? It is a very worthwhile skill to have a guy in your team who can do that, and Stark consistently is able to do that, and he's consistently been excellent that way. But yeah, his performance combined with Cummins, combined with Boland and Green, who again bowled well in their support seamer roles, ended up getting England to be bowled out for 188, 100 runs of a deficit behind Australia. So going into the third innings, Australia pretty much favorites to win. Then the couple of wickets that fell not long after, right? When you're 6 for 100, right? And you're threatening to be bowled out under 150, that actually leaves a chance for England to come back in this match. And I think the biggest credit that has to go to anyone in the context of this match, this third innings, in sparking that revival, and a guy who finally received what I thought were just rewards for what has been a relatively...
He's been England's only real bright light in this series.
Right, but prior to this innings, Rowan, he had a relatively poor statistical record. He had something like 37 runs conceded on average, with only 8 wickets to his name. Mark Wood came again and showed why he's so much more than the stats that he's got, allotted to, and the numbers of him, because he bowled a very impactful, sustained, aggressive, hostile spell.
It was fast, it was short, it was just all at the body, all at that awkward, that skiddy bounce that he gets, and he's sort of mastered.
Yeah, and I like that point that you mentioned with the skiddy bounce, right? Because a lot of the times when you have tall fast bowlers, right, they can bowl really good bounces, but there is a tendency, especially on a slowish wicket like this, right? Even though it was a green top, it was a slowish wicket and lowish wicket, right? If they bang the ball into the pitch, right, it climbs up relatively slower, or it might bounce over the head of someone, and so they can, even though it looks really impressive in person and so forth, right? Very often you can find yourself in a situation with a batsman where it's not that difficult to deal with that, because you can hook, you can duck, weave, and pull with comfort because it's not coming as quickly at you. But with somebody like Mark Wood, he's a very skiddy bowler. So, and when he is at sync, right, when his bounces are at sync, it viciously rears at your throat and seems like it's gaining pace off the pitch and coming quicker. And we saw that in the case of Khwaja's dismissal, where Khwaja is a very good puller of the ball. He showed that in the SCG when the ball on a bouncy-ish pitch with variable bounce, pulled with aplomb and so forth. But we saw him being unable to do anything about that delivery, just hanging his bat effectively there just to get out of the way of a delivery that came so much
92 miles per hour at the throat. That's unplayable.
You could sense that it visibly affected the Australian batsmen, even in the first innings when he wasn't bowling that well, but especially in the second innings, because they were starting to back away from him, right? And that's what actual genuine pace, when it looks like it's threatening you physically, does.
Yep.
It makes batsmen look really fragile in a way that they didn't seem against most other types of bowling. And the other factor of why he was so successful today was, for once, I talked about how I intimated it when we were talking about the first innings. Root for once had a short square leg in place. So, especially with the line of attack that Wood was bowling in the second innings, he tried it in the first innings, but had no close-in fielder to actually support him. But it worked in the second innings, and it saw a lot of batsmen awkwardly hooking and pulling and weaving and getting nicks and so forth, because now there was somebody in close, right, where if they tried to awkwardly fend it off, like Head did in the first innings when Wood bowled him a bumper, if he tried to do that in the second innings, right, it would have gone straight to the field. So that option to just awkwardly fend it off, right, went out of their arsenal. So they had to be more decisive in terms of playing it. And against a ball that's coming and rearing on your throat,
Yeah.
Asking batsmen to often be more decisive against it is much harder.
Yeah. On that, I think the other thing that was really impressive was the rearguard action that the Australians eventually put up after being like 6 for 63, right?
Yeah.
Where Cam Green and Alex Carey bat very well in a good partnership to get them to 100, and then eventually Carey gets them to about 150, and that gets them to enough, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean it's 270, right? So it's scandalizing for England because theoretically they could get there, right?
Yeah, if they, even it's not even theoretically. If they bat long enough, they will get there.
Right.
The question for England is not about about the time. It's more about their ability to score. Well, the question isn't about their ability to score the runs. The question is, can they bat long enough to score runs?
Which we found out in the fourth innings because no, they can't. No, they absolutely can't. I will say though, the way it started out, looked like, they had turned the corner.
It was really promising.
Yeah, because they had like a 66-run partnership for the first wicket, and Burns for once playing with the
68 run partnership for the first wicket. Yeah,
68. But yeah, Burns and Crawley for once playing with some assurance. Crawley again continuing his good, vein of form, if you'd like. I know he's not scored too many runs, but his good vein of form in sense of at least him looking comfortable and assured in the second innings, right, of this particular match. Because once again, he played. I thought. He provided the best English batting performance of the entire match, like he did in the SCG. And I do actually want to point out this innings for something special, again, that I've seen with Crawley, like I did when we were talking about the SCG match, right? In that match, I lauded Crawley because he was pulling deliveries, right? He avoided playing the cover drive that had been getting him out so often, and he threw off the the Australian bowlers, right, off their length, effectively. Because he kept on pulling deliveries that were good or just slightly short of a length, and it forced them to compensate by pitching it fuller or bowling, shorter at the rib cage, where Crawley was able to play with comfort.
Yeah.
This time, he did something a little bit interesting in that he threw them off their line. And how he did this was, the Australian batsmen were constantly bowlers were trying to constantly aim around that fourth stump, that off stump, induce the nick, the corridor uncertainty, if you will. But like the English bowlers in the first innings, they were on occasion over-pitching just a tad. And Crawley sensed that, and being the very intuitively in batsman he is, right? The very a batsman who looks very accomplished throughout this tour than when he's played these sort of innings.
He is sort of like James Vince, but somewhat better.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting perspective.
He looks pretty, and he's very technically sound when it comes to sort of that ability to read the game.
Right, but we saw that today, right? Because when those Australian bowlers were bowling that sort of fourth stump or a third stump line, he forced them to go a bit wider than him. And the reason why he was able to do that before Green came in and got his wicket was because he kept on walking towards off stump and essentially flicking them, a la KP. You made the KP comparison of him.
Yeah, I was about to make that comparison again.
Yeah, but he just walked on the off stump. He knew where his off stump was. His head was on there, but he managed to just casually play on drives to them, right? Against even the movement of the ball, which is risky, mind you. Because the wicket was still doing a little bit. It had largely flattened out, but it was still doing a tiny bit. But the fact that he was able to play it with such assurance, and he was able to do that, was brilliant, right? Because it really did force the Australian bowlers to bowl that wider line to him. And he was able to profit off it.
A lot of credit for Australia to win this match. And I know that he is not going to get enough credit because he wasn't awarded man of the match. Has to go to Cameron. Right. I mean, it just has to.
Yeah, and he took when that partnership was building, right? When they were sensing a little bit of trouble, he really took the onus on himself to, you know what?
I'll win us the match. I'll win us the match by getting these two guys out, because these two guys, if they're here for another session, now all of a sudden they might have only 100 runs to chase.
Yeah, right? and mind you, at the post-match interview, I was watching, Green talk about it. He was mentioning how the Australians themselves were starting to worry a little bit after that partnership had been put together, right? Because especially given the nature of how poor the English batting partnerships have been throughout this entire tour, right? Yeah. It is really, psychologically, when they start putting up a really good stand and they look comfortable and so forth, you are suddenly in a situation where you're like, oh, damn, we might actually, be losing this momentum here, right? Because that pressure that comes with the initial wickets falling, right, is not coming, right? And we expect that almost to happen in the series. But for Green to come in and step in and say, you know what, I'm going to throw my hand up and bowl a superb spell to get these guys out. And he got them out. The dismissals that he induced were of really pretty good deliveries, right? They did things off the air. They did things off the pitch. They were good lines, good lengths, and so forth. I thought was commendable. And I think it shows a lot for Green reaching a maturity as an all-rounder. Because all-rounders, I think you and me both tend to agree with this, all-rounders are not necessarily supposed to be the guys who take, like the massive amounts of wickets, or score massive amounts of runs. What is integral for an all-rounder to be successful is, does he win you the matches in those pivotal moments? When they sense the match is slipping away from them, and when the balance of the match...
That's when they're worth their weight in gold, because their job is to be that guy who can just change the match on the head of it, at the drop of a hat.
Yeah.
Right? That's the magic of an all-rounder.
A really good all-rounder worth the salt. And twice in a Hobart pitch, in conditions that have been the most difficult for a side, it should be added, right? Because with the bat in the first innings, they were playing at the green when the surface was at its greenest. Green comes in, scores 74. When it's in the fourth innings, when the pitch has largely receded in terms of movement, yes, there's a little bit of assistance helpful, but it is at the best batting conditions for the match. Who comes in and gets that burst of 3 wickets? Cam Green. And so...
And when Australia has their back against the wall in the third innings, who comes in with a critical 20?
Green. Again. So the impact performances, right, that we're talking about from Green in this match were great. And that spell underlined it. If you notice that particular spell, he might have not been doing this entirely intentionally all the time, but there were several times where I picked up where he was adjusting where the release points of certain deliveries were, even if they were at the same length, right? In terms of sometimes he was actually getting, like an Australian captain who's captaining him, Pat Cummins, to get the ball to come at a slightly wider release point and angle effectively, so that it induced them to, the English batsmen, to play him sometimes even when he was bowling at fifth stump, when they could have left him, because they felt that the ball was coming in at an angle. It wasn't that much, but it was coming in at an angle where it could have bowled them if they didn't play it. I thought that was brilliant, because he got a couple of wickets here. I think he got actually what do you call it?
Yeah, I think he got Burns with that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and again, fantastic job from him, and again, another fantastic job from Scott Boland, who comes in after Green has made the breakthrough, gets the big wicket of Joe Root, and then just cleans up after that.
As much praise as we can heap on Green, Boland, and the Australian bowling attack as well, there was some genuinely abject batting from
absolutely. I mean, not even just like from a technical standpoint. England they get dismissed for 56 runs after that opening partnership.
Yeah, and
I think that says it all. That genuinely says everything you need to know about England.
It does, but I mean, there were just some dismissals there, which were,
Sam Billings, for instance, right?
Yeah.
And I don't hold it against Sam Billings. He's been called in last second because of an injury crisis, because of English poor management from the ECB, to come in and basically substitute as a wicketkeeper, because all the other wicketkeepers are either hurt, or Ollie Pope, or are not in the squad.
But again, right? It's a pivotal time in the match when he gets dismissed because 107 for 5, right? There is still some minor batting left at the crease. They could salvage something in it, and for him to chip it so softly to mid wicket, but pretty innocuous delivery, honestly, from Boland. That was one of his most innocuous deliveries in the spell, right? It was slower too. It was like only 130 k's. He normally bowls around the 135 k mark.
Yeah.
It's just abysmal batting, quite frankly, and you see it with some of the other dismissals to the point where, like, somebody like Chris Wokes, I know he's not a full-time batsman, but for him to back away and heave, like Robinson's dismissal, which was ungainly, Pope once again being bowled around his legs, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is just, I get these are professional cricketers and they go through a lot, right? We genuinely sympathize with a lot they go through, for sure. But the lack of conviction and fight against bowlers that, quite frankly, weren't bowling even that quick, right? On a wicket that had become the best wicket to bat on in the course of the entire match. It's sad to watch. It just really is sad to watch. The lack of fight and the complete village green cricket, honestly, played at times in England's middle order.
I think that basically sums up our thoughts on the match. Let's talk a little bit about our takeaways.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think the first takeaway that I have from this match, we both have probably sort of gotten the gist of it out already, I'm assuming, from our conversations. But I do think this is the match where Cameron Green is now reached and has developed into the world-class all-rounder that he's been hyped up to be. I think
I honestly think we're gonna talk about this in 5-10 years when he has 50 or 60 caps for Australia. He's one of the best players in the world and seen universally as this is the match that he announced himself, right?
Yes.
He's played a few other series, he's played a few other matches, he's scored a couple of runs here, he's been okay with the ball here and there, but this was a complete performance. This is what you need from an all-rounder. It isn't, okay, he will sometimes be good with the ball and sometimes be good with the bat, but he won't be good with the bat and with the ball at the same time. Ashford, to an extent. But I think in this series we saw really what we have long expected of Cam Green. Real credit to Cam Green for that. And I also want to, give a shout out to the two English bowlers who actually showed like they were competent throughout the series.
The most competent.
Mark Wood and Travis Head. Not Travis Head. Oh, we'll come to Travis Head in a minute. Ollie Robinson.
Yeah.
Because they were fantastic.
I mean, obviously Robinson in this match didn't contribute that much with the ball.
Yeah, but obviously he was injured. So.
But his new ball spell showed again why he's the best new ball bowler in my mind in England, because again he bowled that good pitched up length. He was able to extract lift from this high release point he has, seam it both ways, swing it away as well. Just lovely to see. And then Wood once again showing that he really is an inspirational player, right? He really lifts a side.
He's one of, again, we've talked about on this channel about like fast bowlers who are great because they are fast and take lots of wickets and have low economies and that kind of stuff. And then we talk about fast bowlers who are great because they can inspire their side to do things that you don't expect them to do.
Yeah, and I think his sort of short, skiddy, quick pace, right, combined with Ollie Robinson's slower but
more bounce, more that cunning and guile.
Yeah.
In terms of how he moves the ball and gets the ball to rear off a length.
Yeah, I think both of those for their performances throughout the series and especially in this match show for certain that England going forward really need to build their new ball attack, I would argue, and their pace attack in general around these two things.
But I think the real takeaway from this is Australia may have found, even though Pat Cummins is the captain, and as far as we know, there's no plan in place to get rid of him as captain. But this is Australia, and you and I both know about the Australian perspective on bowling captains.
They're not usually a fan of it. Yes.
Yeah. I think that they have found an alternate option in this series.
Yes.
Well, they found two, really.
But they found one that I think is a long-term viable replacement, that being Travis Head, right?
Yeah.
Travis Head initially, he's been captaining South Australia for a while. He's a pretty good captain there, but obviously his place in the side wasn't that secure because he hadn't been delivering those numbers and those runs and so forth. And really, I think he hadn't shown, even amongst his Australian teammates, that he was truly belonging as a clutch player in their side.
In this series, he showed why he's a clutch player, because he kept, whenever Australia needed somebody to make tough runs and make a lot of them quickly, he was the man for the moment, and he never stopped. First test, second test he scores 150 or something like that?
Well, the first test in the Gabba, he scores 150. Adelaide, he scores a 50 when they need to set up that declaration quickly. And other batsmen are struggling. England, for once, bowled well. Obviously, in the Gabba, it was a situation where England had got a couple of early wickets, and it was looking like, on a spiciest pitch, that Australia could have been bowled out cheaply, relatively, so to speak. They needed to set the tone and get that big total. He gets them to 400, and here again, on a green top, 12 for 3. Right, that's a really hard position to be in as a side. 12 for 3 on a green top, right? He comes in, scores a aggressive 100, and again, right, as you mentioned, really aggressive 100. He scores it in a strike rate around 90. Yeah, 90 effectively, around thereabouts, right? And I think he showed, apart from his time in South Australia, where he showed some tactical nous for the game, what he showed really through his batting performance is that he will stand up in moments where Australia need him to deliver against, when the situations are going a little bit tough. I know this English side isn't the best to come to these shores by any means, but they have put them in occasionally on tough situations. And when they have done that, Travis Head has stood up. I think him going forward, Australia should seriously consider grooming him as captain, and the way that they should do that is for the upcoming series, the tour to Pakistan and the series against Sri Lanka, they should entrust him with the position of the vice captain.
Yeah, I do want to add one other sort of thing. Takeaway for England: you have to score more than 300 runs in the series. I don't care how good your bowling is. If you cannot score more than 300 runs in a series, you are going to lose. It doesn't matter.
And critically, Ron, it's not only that they failed to score 300 runs in the series even once. They've gotten dismissed. They've played 10 innings, right, during the series. 6 of those they've been dismissed under 200. That's just not a situation where you're going to win.
Wasn't there a stat that this is like the worst English side to tour since the 1890s or something?
Yeah, something of that effect in terms of batting. Yeah, and again, it's just not, you're not going to win matches that way. So it caps off really it really sums up what has been a wretched tour for the English. And if they need to succeed, they need to be able to make those fundamental adjustments to their batting lineup, and to their batsmen need to make those fundamental adjustments into themselves in order for them to actually succeed. But yeah, that really concludes, I guess, our thoughts about the series at large in terms of the individual matches. Do stay tuned, because we will be providing sort of a review of the individual players in the context of the series, a rating of sorts on this channel as well. So stay tuned for that. Till then, guys, stay safe. Tune in to us next time, and we'll share our thoughts on another series. So take care.
See you.
Bye.